The camera opens on a stark image, a red Interpol warrant stamped across the screen, the kind of paper that has sent fear through presidents, generals, and fugitives around the world. But here in Africa, something different is happening. Instead of fear, there is fire. Instead of silence, there is defiance. Brothers and sisters, imagine this, a continent that for centuries was shackled by chains, now being told it must bow again this time, not with whips and guns, but with a piece of paper. But let us ask the question openly, can a piece of paper bend the will of millions who have already broken the chains of slavery and colonization? Can a red notice erase the courage of a generation that has sworn never again? Interpol believes it can intimidate Paris, believes it can order Washington, believes it can dictate, but Africa today is answering with one voice: we will not bow. Think of the hypocrisy. Those who drew false borders across Africa now cry about international law. Those who plundered gold, uranium, and oil now speak of global security. Those who enslaved generations now accuse Africans of being dangerous. But here is the truth: the danger is not in Africa rising. The danger for them is the end of their empire. My friends, my comrades, this is not just about one leader or one nation. This is about whether Africa will forever remain a mine for foreign companies or whether Africa will finally own her destiny. And so I put the question to you: will we let paper chains hold us down, or will we stand together and tear them apart? Stay with me until the end of this video, because what is happening right now could change the future of Africa forever. And if you believe the truth must be louder than the headlines, then share this message, stand with us, and let the world know Africa will never bow again. The announcement came like thunder across the continent. Interpol had issued an arrest warrant against a sitting African leader. For many outside observers, this seemed like a simple matter of law enforcement. But in Africa, the reaction was immediate and visceral. This was not justice, it was politics, and everyone knew it. The warrant was framed as neutral, as part of an international system that claims to protect order. Yet for millions of Africans, it was instantly recognized as a weapon forged in the same workshops that once created slavery, colonization, and endless exploitation. The timing was no accident. Africa is rising, reclaiming its voice, its resources, and its sovereignty. From Burkina Faso to Niger, from Mali to Ghana, leaders and citizens alike have begun demanding that gold, uranium, oil, and fertile lands be used first for African children, not for the profits of corporations in Paris, Washington, or Brussels. This shift has shaken the foundations of an empire built on African wealth. And so, as in centuries past, the empire responds not with dialogue, not with fairness, but with intimidation. Interpol's red notice became the new chain, a chain made not of iron, but of paper and ink. But Africans have long memories. They remember who truly violated international order. Was it Africans who enslaved millions and shipped them across oceans? Was it Africans who carved false borders with rulers and blood? Was it Africans who bombed nations and toppled governments from the Middle East to Latin America? The answer is obvious, and the hypocrisy is deafening. Yet today, when one African soldier dares to say enough, the machinery of the so-called civilized world is mobilized against him. The leader at the center of this storm did not tremble. He did not retreat into silence. Instead, he looked directly into the cameras and declared that Africa would not bow. His words struck a chord not only because of their defiance, but because they named what everyone already felt in their bones. Interpol is not neutral. It has become the long arm of those who cannot win the battle of ideas, so they hide behind red stamps and signatures. This was not the first time Africa's heroes have been branded criminals. Patrice Lumumba, the Congolese leader who dared to claim independence, was called dangerous until he was assassinated. Thomas Sankara, the Burkina captain who preached self-reliance, was branded a radical and murdered. Nelson Mandela was imprisoned for decades as a terrorist. Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, who dreamed of continental unity, was called a threat until he was toppled. The pattern is clear. Every African leader who stood tall for his people was demonized, hunted, or killed. And now, because another voice dares to continue in their path, Interpol has added his name to that infamous list. But here is the difference today's. Africa is not the Africa of the 1960s or 1980s. The continent is more connected, more aware, more determined. The youth, millions strong, have awakened. Workers, farmers, soldiers, and students see through the lies. They know this warrant is not about one man. It is about silencing a whole generation that refuses to sell its minerals for scraps, that refuses to kneel before Paris or Washington. That is why the reaction was not fear, but fury. On the streets of Ouagadougou, Bamako, Niamey, and beyond, people spoke openly. A piece of paper cannot chain a free people. The warrant backfired the moment it was signed. Instead of isolating its target, it exposed the truth to millions more. It showed that the so-called international community is not about fairness or law, it is about control. It proved that whenever Africans try to own their resources, the West will reach for any weapon, even Interpol. And so the event became larger than Interpol itself. It became a symbol, a spark. On social media, in markets, in universities, the question spread: if one leader can be targeted for defending Africa, then who is next? And the answer came like a wave: all of us. This is not just about one president, one soldier, or one warrant. It is about Africa's right to exist with dignity, to say no to exploitation, to live free from foreign dictates. The so-called warrant of arrest has failed to intimidate. Instead, it has become a rallying cry, a badge of honor, and a reminder that paper cannot stop a movement whose time has come. The empire may still sign documents and issue threats, but Africa is awake. And once awake, no continent can be chained again. The speech did not stop at exposing hypocrisy. It rose higher like a storm building momentum until every sentence felt like a drumbeat of defiance. They say I am a danger, the leader declared, but I ask you, whose danger? Whose law? Whose order? The questions cut deep, reminding millions that the so-called guardians of law and order are the very powers who built their empires on the ashes of Africa. Here was the climax. Names were called out boldly without hesitation. Donald Trump, Emmanuel Macron, the bureaucrats of Brussels. Their titles and institutions no longer shielded them. They were unmasked, accused not of protecting justice, but of orchestrating exploitation. France, once the master of colonies, was told flatly, France is finished in Africa. Your arrogance has expired. To the United States, the challenge was sharper still. You shout about greatness, but was America ever great for Africans? Was it great when millions were enslaved on plantations? Was it great when our gold and oil built your skyscrapers? And to the European Union, the accusation was cold and damning. You celebrate dictators who bow and call criminals those who refuse. You are not guardians of morality, you are guardians of hypocrisy. Such words might have been expected to cause fear, but instead they ignited pride. Across Africa, the reaction was electric. In Bamako, chants erupted, "We will not bow." In Niamey, young men painted walls with slogans calling Interpol a tool of empire. In Ouagadougou, market women lifted their voices insisting that no piece of paper could silence their will. On social media, hashtags multiplied: "Our Africa will not bow," "Dai our gold for our children," "Interpol is not neutral," turning defiance into a continental chorus. It was not only the youth who responded. Farmers in the field spoke of the insult of being told their land still belonged to outsiders. Workers in the mines recalled decades of toil, while foreign companies carted off the wealth. Soldiers at their posts murmured that this was not just about politics, but about dignity itself. Every sector of society saw themselves reflected in the confrontation. This was no longer the fight of one man. It had become the fight of a people. And as the fire spread, so did the memory of Africa's fallen heroes. Patrice Lumumba assassinated after being branded dangerous. Thomas Sankara cut down for daring to preach self-reliance. Nelson Mandela once condemned as a terrorist. Kwame Nkrumah toppled for dreaming of unity. Their names were spoken again and again, invoked not as relics of history, but as comrades in the present struggle. To stand accused by Interpol, many now believed was to stand in the company of giants. What was meant to be a mark of shame became a badge of honor. Western media outlets predictably scrambled to paint the event in darker tones. Headlines whispered of destabilization, rebellion, and rogue states. Yet Africans for once were unmoved. They had seen the script too many times before. They knew that words like democracy and human rights were often weapons wielded selectively, cloaking greed in virtue. The arrest warrant became the final proof. When Africa dares to rise, the system labels it criminal. International reactions were divided. In Paris, officials spoke with indignation, defending their right to protect stability. In Washington, voices called for sanctions and isolation. In Brussels, committees convened full of resolutions, but empty of self-reflection. But elsewhere in Accra, in Algiers, in Addis Ababa, there was a different murmur. Could this be the turning point? Could this defiance spark the long-awaited unity of Africa? The climax was reached in the leader's vow: if you jail me, the prisons will not hold the revolution. If you kill me, my blood will water the tree of African freedom. These words echoed with biblical weight, searing themselves into the hearts of millions. It was no longer a question of whether he would fall. It was a promise that even if he did, others would rise. And with that, the balance of fear shifted. No longer were Africans afraid of warrants or sanctions. It was the West trembling at the thought of a continent uniting around its resources and dignity. Thus, the arrest warrant designed to silence became a megaphone. The more the empire threatened, the louder Africa spoke. And in that roar, in that defiance, one truth became undeniable: the age of submission was over. The era of resistance had arrived. When the warrant was first announced, some in the West imagined that African citizens would retreat into silence, fearing the weight of international law. But what happened on the ground told a very different story. Instead of paralyzing society, the warrant energized it. Markets, schools, and village gatherings all buzzed with the same conversation. If they can hunt down one of our leaders for defending Africa, then they are hunting all of us. What was intended as an act of intimidation quickly transformed into a mirror, reflecting for ordinary people the true nature of the system that claimed to speak in the name of justice. Across the continent, civil society awoke with new clarity. Youth organizations staged rallies not only in capital cities, but in small towns, waving placards that read, "Africa will not bow, and our minerals our future." Student unions held debates and vigils, reminding one another that history's greatest victories were won not in comfort, but in defiance. In Burkina Faso, teachers recounted to their classes how Patrice Lumumba and Thomas Sankara were once branded as criminals, only to be remembered today as heroes. The warrant had unexpectedly become an educational tool, a living lesson in how power operates against African sovereignty. Politically, the effect was just as profound. Governments, once cautious about criticizing international institutions, found themselves under pressure from their own citizens. In Niger and Mali, political leaders declared openly that they would not cooperate with what they described as a foreign agenda disguised as law. In Ghana and Senegal, opposition parties began questioning whether their own governments were too quick to submit to external dictates. Even leaders outside West Africa sensed the shift. In South Africa, civil society organizations pointed to the warrant as proof that international law is applied selectively harsh against Africans who resist silent against Western allies who commit the same or worse. The warrant also reshaped conversations about sovereignty. For decades, African nations have been told that their resources are global commodities to be extracted and shipped abroad, while local communities see little benefit. Now, ordinary citizens began to link their daily struggles, poor hospitals, failing schools, unemployment, to the theft of their wealth by foreign corporations protected by Western governments. In markets, women asked, "If our gold stays here, why should our children still go hungry?" In rural villages, farmers asked why uranium from their soil powers Parisian lights while their own homes remain in darkness. The Interpol warrant, intended as a blow against one man, became a spark that illuminated these injustices for millions. On a civil level, the warrant also deepened solidarity across borders. Social media campaigns united voices from Dakar to Dar es Salaam. Musicians released protest songs. Clergy in churches and mosques preached about dignity and sovereignty, linking faith with freedom. Workers' unions pledged strikes if Western governments attempted sanctions. Instead of isolating its target, the warrant isolated its issuers. But perhaps the most lasting political consequence was the exposure of a double standard. Africans could now see with painful clarity that international institutions move swiftly against leaders who refuse to hand over resources, yet remain curiously silent when Western-backed dictators suppress their people. This realization planted a dangerous seed: if the law is not neutral, then Africans must build new systems of law and order for themselves. Thus, what began as an attempt to undermine authority ended up strengthening it. Citizens felt their struggles validated their anger, recognized their dignity, defended. Politicians who hesitated to align with the message of sovereignty found themselves on the defensive, accused of betraying their people. In this way, a warrant designed to weaken a movement instead broadened it, turning one leader's defiance into a collective political awakening. The irony is sharp. A single piece of paper meant to chain one individual has unchained the imagination of millions. Far from silencing Africa, the warrant has given its people a louder voice, a sharper vision, and a stronger resolve to seize their destiny. In Washington, the warrant was greeted with the kind of confidence that comes from long habit. American officials spoke of upholding international norms and defending democracy. Yet behind the polished statements, there was unease. For decades, the United States had relied on a certain image, the protector of freedom, the champion of human rights. But now Africans were asking loudly, was America ever great for Africa? Was it great when millions of Africans were enslaved on plantations to build America's wealth? Was it great when gold, oil, and cocoa were siphoned away to power U.S. industries while African villages starved? The very narrative of American greatness, repeated endlessly at home, was being challenged abroad and by voices too loud to ignore. France, too, found itself exposed. Emmanuel Macron continued to repeat the old slogans of liberty, equality, fraternity, but his words rang hollow against the backdrop of uranium from Niger, gold from Mali, and sweat from Burkina Faso that had long enriched Paris. When African leaders declared France is finished in Africa, it was not just rhetoric. It was the expression of a continental fatigue that has been growing for decades. The warrant, instead of restoring French authority, reminded Africans of how deeply France's fortunes were tied to resources taken from the Sahel. In Brussels, the European Union framed the warrant as a matter of international stability. Yet many in Africa and beyond saw only hypocrisy. How could the EU speak of stability while welcoming dictators who bowed to its interests, yet branding criminal any leader who demanded sovereignty? For neutral observers, the contradiction was glaring. The same institutions that claimed to be the moral compass of the world appeared willing to twist justice when their economic lifelines were threatened. Globally, the reactions were mixed. In parts of the global South, Latin America, Asia, and the Middle East, commentators recognized a familiar pattern. They saw in Interpol's warrant the same mechanisms once used against their own reformers and revolutionaries. Newspapers in Caracas, Tehran, and Dhaka drew parallels to sanctions and coups that had toppled independent-minded leaders in their regions. For them, Africa's defiance was not reckless, it was overdue. Even within Western societies, cracks appeared. Diaspora communities, especially African Americans and Afro-Europeans, took to social media to highlight the double standards. In Paris, protests outside French ministries were joined not just by Africans, but by French citizens disillusioned with their government's colonial hangover. In New York and London, student groups debated openly whether international law had been captured by empire. The warrant, intended as a show of unity from the West, instead revealed division within its own societies. Meanwhile, in Africa, the warrant reshaped foreign relations. Nations traditionally cautious of antagonizing the West began exploring alternatives more openly. Russia and China, already courting African alliances, offered stronger words of support. Leaders in the BRICS bloc pointed to the warrant as proof that the international system was broken and in need of reform. Suddenly, the idea of a new African order aligned less with Washington and Brussels and more with emerging powers gained traction. But perhaps the most important global consequence was symbolic. The warrant became a test of credibility for institutions like Interpol, the EU, and even the United Nations. If Africans could see bias so clearly, then the rest of the world could not be far behind. Each statement from Western capitals, each headline in Western newspapers only reinforced the sense that these powers were defending not law, but privilege. Thus, from America's polished podiums to Europe's marble halls, from Asia's crowded streets to Africa's dusty markets, one truth began to settle: in the Interpol warrant had failed. It had not stopped a movement. It had exposed an empire. And in doing so, it gave the world a glimpse of a new balance, one in which Africa is no longer a silent spectator, but a loud, defiant actor shaping the global stage. The Interpol warrant was supposed to be a warning. Instead, it became a confession that the West can no longer dominate Africa through dialogue, through persuasion, or through partnership. When power must hide behind papers and signatures, it shows not strength, but weakness. And for Africa, this moment is historic. It proves that the old order is crumbling and that the continent's destiny is no longer negotiable. But let us be clear, the struggle is not over. Threats of sanctions, economic sabotage, and propaganda will intensify. The empire will not surrender quietly. They will try to divide us, to set brother against brother, to lure some leaders with promises while isolating others with punishment. This is the oldest trick in the book, and yet Africa has awakened. Once a people awaken, no weapon, not even the machinery of international law, can force them back to sleep. So the question falls to you. My brothers and sisters watching today, do you believe that the courage to stand against Interpol, against Washington, against Paris, is the spark of Africa's final liberation? Or will we let this moment pass in silence? If you feel that President Ibrahim Traoré's defiance speaks not only for Burkina Faso, but for all of Africa, then share this message. Please let the world know you are one of the first to support him. And if you believe truth is more important than headlines, subscribe now, because Africa's story is not over. It is only just beginning.